this is something that will appear in your orbit a great deal. So whether you're talking to Candace Owens, which is much more prominent, or
Hmm.
Lauren Southern, or even Nick, conspiracy theory is something that pops up a lot, and it seems really ubiquitous in online culture anyway.
Okay.
And so I'm wondering about how you think about this. So let me just ask you, just to kind of set up where we are. So um, when I'm talking with someone and they say, "Oh, the moon landing was fake. We never landed on the moon."
Hmm.
Oftentimes my reply will be, "Oh, that's just a conspiracy theory." And what I mean by that is that that's not an explanation that's worth taking seriously.
Okay.
Basically, what I mean when I label something a conspiracy theory is that it's just false, right? I'm not taking it seriously.
Sure.
So, do you think of conspiracy theory as the term, as the label, as just a label for something being false? So conspiracy theory equals not worth my time to consider. Or are you of the mind that, well, just because it's a conspiracy theory, it might be true? So what do you think about that?
I think it's funny. I think there are three stages to understanding what like conspiracy theory means. I think that the first, the most base understanding of a conspiracy theory is crude and incorrect. I wouldn't say crude, I would say incorrect. And a conspiracy theory is just like a false statement or like a bad thing that isn't real. There's no reason to believe it. So like, oh, this is that's a conspiracy theory means, yeah, it's like an emotive way of saying, boo, I don't like that idea, or boo, I think that idea is not true. I think that a slightly more sophisticated form of a conspiracy theory is leaning into the actual word conspiracy, saying that there was some sort of plan that was concocted to make a thing appear a certain way. So like the moon landing was a conspiracy theory, means that there was a plan to make it seem real even though it wasn't. And then I think that the final evolution of, or I shouldn't say final, my current understanding of conspiracy theory is, I actually think conspiracy theory fits well, but it's in a way that would have to explain, and that conspiracy theories, in my opinion, they take a collection of facts that could be explained by some pretty obvious Occam's razor explanation, and instead it substitutes a conspiracy or a top-down explanation that happens to also plug into a whole bunch of other titillating or sensationalist narratives that one might have. So like the three stages of this might be like, oh, like if I say the moon landing is a conspiracy in its dumbest form, it's like, oh, it's fake. Or if I say like, oh, well, the moon landing is a conspiracy, I mean like, oh, well, okay, I guess it was planned by some people. Or if I say the moon landing is a conspiracy theory and it's most like, in the highest form that I understand it right now, is that like, the moon landing is fake because there is a whole grand narrative of some top-down power that's orchestrating events around the world that not only explains these things that seem maybe hard to explain, but also explain a whole bunch of other things like all of the ills and everything of society, essentially. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. So it sounds like you're a little bit more on the when I label something a conspiracy theory, I just mean I'm not taking it as a serious explanation
Kind
side
of,
of
although I
things.
try not to call things conspiracy theories because I think that would be at the end of a debate when I feel like I've reached the end. Because if I call something a conspiracy theory, that's how most people hear it. Oh, it's fake. If I'm arguing with somebody, so they'll immediately shut down, and then I've lost the ability to communicate anything else. Yeah.
Sure. And so how do you feel about these quote unquote conspiracy theories that seem to turn out to be true? So, for example, if you were doing a Watergate research before the scandal, exploded, before Nixon had recorded himself, and you had this theory about what was going on at the Watergate hotel, people would have regarded you as a conspiracy theorist. So, what do you think about those cases where it seems like a conspiracy theory turns out to be true?
Well, I think that you have to be careful. This is why I don't really like the term conspiracy theory as much. If I'm using it as purely as a pejorative and not to further like a reasonable conversation, because like conspiracy in the strictest of senses, conspiracies are true. People make plans and things do happen, right? Like 9/11 was a conspiracy. There was a group of people that got together and planned to do something. Watergate was a conspiracy. Conspiracy theory has such like a negative, pejorative connotation to it that, yeah, you have to be really careful how you use it because in some ways it loses its descriptive power and in other ways it can backfire. So for instance, I think in a pejorative sense, there was a conspiracy theory that COVID was created in a lab in China. I think there was a huge conspiracy theory around that, but it doesn't necessarily mean that if more evidence comes out that says that, it was, and there's some stuff that points to the idea that maybe it did originate from a lab. That's still not the consensus, but it's possible, more plausible at least than it was in the beginning. Well, now if you've called that a conspiracy, well, now you look like you're being a hypocrite by saying like, oh, well, actually, maybe there is something here. So yeah, I just think the term conspiracy theory is really bad. It's too pejoratively loaded in either direction.
Good. So when philosophers write about this, and of course philosophers are concerned, and there's not a great deal of philosophical literature devoted specifically to conspiracy theorizing, although it's growing. Philosophers are concerned with whether or not a conspiracy theory ever ought to be taken seriously as a standard of explanation, right? So whether or not we can be a generalist, which is this is the camp of philosophers that say that conspiracy theory, just by design, by the nature of the kind of explanation that it never is going to count as a good explanation. That's the generalist approach versus the.
When you say real
approach.
quick, when the term conspiracy theory is being used there, what does it mean to say conspiracy theory there?
Good. So there's definitely some components to the conspiracy theory. So here's a definition that a philosopher called I think Barbara Fredrickson is her name. She offers. She says a conspiracy theory is a proposed explanation of events that's contrary to an officially sanctioned alternative. So that's the first criteria. It's contrary to the officially sanctioned narrative. So secondly, it involves the causal agency of a group of agents working together in secret. So there's your conspiracy. And thirdly, it's often or most likely for a sinister purpose. So when we say conspiracy theory, this is what philosophers typically are referring to when they're talking about this. So these three components: it's in opposition to the officially sanctioned narrative. It contains a conspiracy, and there's some kind of sinister or malevolent element to that conspiracy, right? So for example, that third component you might wonder about, because who can decide what's sinister or what's malevolent? But it would be really weird for you to have a surprise birthday party for someone
and call
jump
it a
out from behind the
conspiracy
couch, and they say, "Oh, you conspired against me." That seems strange, right?
Okay.
So,
That's fair. Okay, gotcha. This is a workable definition. I understand this. Okay.
Right. So now the particularist approach, this is the dominant view in philosophers working in this area. Epistemologists working in this area are particularist about conspiracy theories. They say that you can't rule them out just as a category of explanation because there's no criteria within that's universal to all conspiracy theories that automatically make them a bad explanation. And so in other words, conspiracy theories turn out to be true once in a while, so you just have to look into them all, right?
Correct.
That's the more particularist approach, right? So these are the two sort of ends of the extreme. Now there are variations. I find myself a little bit more on the generalist side of things, but mostly for pragmatic reasons. But most philosophers defend some kind of particularist view. So that's sort of where the philosophical debate stands, and it's certainly interesting, like from an epistemological standpoint, like how can we know what's true, and it's certainly something I spend a lot of time with my students, thinking about, like, can we recognize certain features in an explanation of an event in the world that automatically makes it not a good explanation.
Interesting. I don't like the only thing I don't like about this generalist view of how you said it, the generalists might view a conspiracy theory, is that it feels like this is, would it make sense to say this is like normatively loaded to be a bad thing? That like it's not, it's something that shouldn't be, or it's like epistemically poisoned. And like you said, I don't like that because, like, I don't know if you can say deductively, if I look at these 1, 2, and 3, opposition to official story, conspiracy between people, and sinister element, things like this happen. So I don't think I can be opposed to this as a category of things when these things have clearly happened in the past. So that seems really strange to me that somebody would write something off just based on these 3 elements.
Good. So there's more to it than there's more to the generalist argument against conspiracy
Sorry.
theories
I want
it's merely baked into this definition.
Gotcha. Okay, gotcha.
For example, a lot of times a generalist will point to the fact that conspiracy theories are by design not falsifiable.
True. Okay, yes.
Because if there's a conspiracy, then of course there's going to be a counter information that disconfirms the conspiracy, right? So I can never disconfirm it because evidence against the conspiracy actually counts as evidence for it. Right.
I'm so curious if I can ask you, is there a fallacy called all roads lead to Rome?
I heard you say this the other day on stream, and I haven't seen this in any sort of informal fallacy textbooks or whatever, but that seems right.
Gotcha.
There seems something really fallacious about this reasoning, that there's something going on here, and people that do formal logic probably have a better label for it than I do, but it seems like there's something going on here that's really related to the topic that we're pointing to.
Yeah, somebody told me that it's just what I'm saying is just like basically lack of falsifiability in other words. But the example, if you heard me say this, the example was related to Andrew Tate. Did you hear me walk through that?
Yes.
That every single possible thing, like you said, any form of disconfirming evidence actually proves the theory, which is frustrating. Yeah. Okay.
Right, and which is one reason it's one sort of epistemological reason it's almost impossible to argue with a conspiracy theorist. Put aside the psychological stuff,
Yeah.
because counter evidence counts as evidence for it.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. Like